Peace be with you. Welcome to the Institute of All Intelligent Life. My name is Alan Kiesler. Today is Monday, October 17th, 2016. And today we're going to talk about consciousness. So we'll wait for a minute or two for a few more people to arrive. So first of all, as we're waiting, I'm going to request you to do something which I started this class by talking about, and that was deep breathing, because the topic we're going to discuss today is, although some of the other topics have been quite difficult to accept also, but this is a very deep topic and difficult to understand and easy to misunderstand or get a wrong idea about. So I'm experiencing a weak signal. I don't know, maybe you can see me a little bit here. I got the message that I should move to a different location, so I just went outside. So by the slight light of a street light, I'm out in front of my house. I'm going to go back into the institute. Hopefully it will maintain the signal and I'll be able to continue the class. But while I'm heading back, you can kindly start doing some deep breathing. I was about to say, when I lost the signal, to please deep breathe in and hold your breath. Very, very slowly breathe in and then let out when you get your lungs completely full. Okay, I'm heading back to the light outside the institute. All right. All right, I hope we'll continue to have the signal now. So, I hope you've been breathing. If you haven't, please do so now. We'll just wait a minute. And exhale. So, we're going to talk about consciousness, and the most fundamental reality, according to my understanding of what extraterrestrial sources have explained very, very clearly, many different sources, not just one, that consciousness is the fundamental reality. In other words, we think, according to modern science that is, as it's taught in our universities, that matter is fundamental, and as a result of the combination of molecules, life emerges, and that is DNA, as we know it. And then gradually, as there is evolution, the living entities, the bacteria, then gradually evolving to higher forms of life, at some point in that development, there is consciousness. And at some further point, then there is what we call human consciousness, which often is referred to as reflective consciousness. So this is a fundamental misconception. Actually, consciousness is the original reality, and everything else derives from consciousness. So matter, what we call matter, also comes from consciousness. As we discussed earlier, matter really is a result of motion or vibration, and that different types of vibration or motion, as I was describing earlier in one class, there are different types of scalar motion. So scalar motion is motion which has no direction in the sense that we talk about motion usually in terms of going from point A to point B, in a certain direction, but scalar motion means you're just moving, but not in any particular direction. So what is it that is moving? So first of all, the basic fundamental, most fundamental reality is consciousness. And what we consider matter, that is unconscious matter, is also made ultimately out of consciousness. So what we're going to do today is explore consciousness itself, and gradually we'll move into more descriptions of how matter emerges from consciousness rather than the other way around. So consciousness has two aspects. It can be discussed in many different ways, but first of all, my understanding is the most fundamental distinction to understand is two different aspects of consciousness. And those two aspects are, one, infinite, unlimited consciousness, and two, consciousness which has been intentionally limited. So, if you're theologically oriented, then it won't be difficult for you to understand that I'm talking about what is usually called God as the unlimited consciousness, and I'm talking about us as the limited consciousness. So each one of us can experience our own consciousness, that is our own being. We are conscious beings. We all, each and every one of us, is aware. But we often don't reflect upon what that awareness is, what that consciousness is. And even, it's astonishing, it's absolutely astonishing, even in the development of modern science, there was hardly any reflection about what consciousness is until the last 2 or 3 decades. Some before that, but basically modern science, and even today, much of modern science totally neglects this idea of consciousness. They may say, well, it's not a scientific subject, or it cannot be studied scientifically. But that's a very, very foolish position to take, because science is supposed to be discussing all phenomena. And consciousness is the most basic phenomenon that we experience. It is the thing by which we experience our own consciousness. So each one of us is an individual consciousness. You can say a quantum of consciousness. Whereas there is also the unlimited field of consciousness, which is what we call God, or by many different names, of course. So this is the first principle that we need to understand, not a later philosophical principle. This is a very, very fundamental principle that we must understand, that consciousness exists in these two features. First of all, unlimited consciousness, and secondly, limited consciousness. So the next point that we need to, maybe we should meditate on this a little bit. Just in order to really grasp it further, I'm going to take a minute and ask you to meditate on this. Meditating doesn't really mean thinking about, although that's our tendency, the way we have been educated. We ought to think about something and figure it out. But what meditate about it means is just pause, like I've instructed previously, take a deep breath, and reflect upon this reality of my own consciousness, and the possibility, at least, if you don't want to directly, immediately accept it, that's okay, but just consider the possibility that just as I am conscious, and I am conscious, right now our condition is that we are conscious of our bodies. I am conscious of my body, you're conscious of your body, each one of us is conscious of our own body, and that consciousness is therefore limited. Of course, it's not exactly limited to our body. We can extend our consciousness in many ways. But first of all, we can reflect on this reality that I experience the state of my body, the condition of my body. The fact that I have some pain in my body, in my stomach or in my knees or wherever, I directly experience that pain, and you don't. And you may have some pain in your body, a headache or whatever, and you experience that, and other people don't, generally. Of course, each of us has experienced cases where we become aware of somebody else's pain, and somehow it seems like we ourselves, in some way at least, are experiencing that pain. So, and telepathy, of course, indicates that we are experiencing somebody else's thoughts also. So there are ways that our consciousness extends beyond our bodily limits, but basically, just to understand this point, we can easily understand and we can reflect on this idea that I am a quantum of consciousness, which somehow or the other is related to this body, and somehow or the other exists within this body in a way different from how it exists elsewhere. That is, I'm directly connected with my body, and my consciousness pervades my whole body. I may prick my toe, or I may touch the top of my head, going out to the ends of my fingers. I can feel, as I've done before. You can do this, and you can go like this, and you can feel some tingling. So that's also a perception that our body, in other words, I can feel this here, right here between my hands, or and I can feel the pain in my head or the pain in my toe, and the pleasure also I can experience, the extent of this body, but generally not beyond it, as we are presently conscious. So let's reflect a little bit more on this very, very fundamental truth that consciousness exists. In fact, I am made out of consciousness, or I am consciousness. That is my most fundamental feature of my existence. And you experience your consciousness, I experience my consciousness. So similarly, there are larger consciousnesses than ourselves. I've explained before, for example, that the earth is also conscious. The earth is a conscious being. Just like you are a conscious being living in your body, I am a conscious being living in my body. Similarly, this earth planet and every other planet and star and even galaxy, etc., is a conscious being, and their consciousnesses experience their bodies, their planetary bodies, in a way similar to how we experience our bodies. So there are consciousnesses on a larger scale than we are. Their bodies, that is, are different. They themselves may be identical to us in terms of being a conscious being. So similarly, just as this planet, our sun, our galaxy are all conscious beings whose consciousness pervades their body, similarly there is a consciousness that pervades the entire universe. Now this may come as a little bit of a surprise to you, but that's not quite God, although practically that's God, you might say. But because there are many universes, as I've talked about, each one of those universes has a being whose consciousness pervades that entire universe. But that is not the unlimited consciousness totally, because that consciousness is limited to that universe. So similarly, there is the totality of all existence. Well, we'll talk about first about this dimensional existence that we're living in, which is made up of many, many universes and many, many dimensions. There must also be a consciousness that pervades this entire material existence, you can say. So that consciousness is also, practically speaking, God. From our perspective, certainly that would be God. Yet, and this is we're getting a little more deep here, a little more difficult, but that consciousness is also not quite the original God. Now, why do I say this? Primarily because of the existence of extra-dimensional reality. I've discussed previously that we are living within a universe, and there are many universes, and to escape from the limitations of this universe, we have to pass through a sort of barrier. And when we do that, we can emerge into the transdimensional reality. So that reality is outside of, or beyond, or in a different realm, or a different dimension, maybe, although words fail us really to describe this. But that dimension of existence exists, and therefore that consciousness which pervades our universe and all the other universes within this reality, this dimensional reality, that consciousness is not the consciousness that pervades the entire extra-dimensional reality. So just as in this reality there are suns and there are galaxies, each of which has a consciousness associated with it, similarly in the transdimensional existence there are many, as I described them because I saw them, shining, glowing, brightly shining globes or spheres or realms, each one of those, and there are unlimited numbers of them, or I don't know if they're limited or unlimited, but I've seen what seemed to be an unlimited number. And each one of them has a size that's, to our calculation, unlimited. That is, if we were to go there, we would experience, just as within our universe, according to our experience, practically this universe is unlimited. We can hardly describe how big it is. I mean, we can describe it, but whether we can really understand that, how big it is, that's another question. So our universe appears to us to be unlimited. We can't begin to count the number of stars even in it, what to speak of the number of grains of sand. Even the number of grains of sand on our planet is a little hard for our minds to comprehend. But there are, according to later research, more recent research, I think scientists are saying there are something like 2 trillion galaxies. That number may increase. And that is within what we can observe with the Hubble telescope. So we are talking about extents, sizes of things that are really beyond our ability to understand. So each of the transdimensional spheres, each of the glowing, shining spheres of the transcendental or transdimensional world is unlimitedly large also by our understanding. Now, and we're coming to the most interesting point of all, of course, there must be also a consciousness that pervades the entire transdimensional existence as well as this existence in which we're living and all the other aspects or universes of this dimensional or material existence. So that is, I propose, what we must understand to be the original God, which we may call Allah. We may call that God by any name, but that is the original, all-pervading, truly all-pervading consciousness. Okay, that's the first point. We need to understand that there exist 2 types of consciousness. One, truly all-pervading consciousness, and then limited consciousnesses, which extend even much smaller than ourselves. For example, if we look at our own bodies, there are millions and billions, probably, of tiny, tiny consciousnesses within our consciousness. That is, each cell in our body is actually also a conscious unit. And each cell in our body is made up of many, many molecules and atoms. And each atom ultimately has a consciousness attached to it also. So there are many, many levels or sizes, you can say, of consciousness. Of course, it appears, to the best of my understanding, in one sense, the limited consciousnesses are all equal. But the bodies of those consciousnesses, if you want to use the word soul, that's the word commonly used in traditional religious terminology, the soul of each atom, the soul of each molecule or the soul of each cell within our bodies, and the soul associated with, sometimes there are actually consciousnesses associated with things that we wouldn't think of as being conscious. I mean, we usually would maybe even not think of a tree as being conscious, but trees and plants are definitely conscious. There have been a lot of experiments that prove that plants have emotions. There are ways, just like a device similar to a lie detector, when put upon a plant's branch or twig or leaf, will detect emotions, including if you approach a plant with the intention even to cut it down, the plant responds. You can detect the emotional response of a plant. So even plants, and although this may be a little shocking to some people, it also appears that this consciousness can be associated with non-living, what we call at least non-living things, like a mountain or even a rock. So there are many, many aspects of the limited consciousness and different sizes of bodies associated with consciousness that is limited to the body. And there also is the unlimited, all-pervading consciousness. So I think there's a very, very important point that we need to mention right here, and that is, it's very obvious if one accepts this, what I've been discussing so far about the fact that consciousness can be attached to bodies of all different sizes. It's very easy to understand now why, although there is only one God, and as I've said before, we are all deeply indebted to the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, for emphasizing that there is only one God, because people have tended throughout human history to identify one of those much larger beings, such as the sun or the moon or stars, as God, and to worship that being as somehow worthy of our worship. Now, it's quite possible, I mean, I would say it is the truth, but I wouldn't be dogmatic on this, but it appears quite real that persons who do worship such objects as the sun or the moon, they can derive some sort of result from that worship. But that worship is not really worship of God. And just to give an example of how this is, very crude example, because all examples are rough comparisons, but just like a king in a kingdom is the ruling authority of that kingdom, and that king may have ministers who serve the king. Those ministers have a certain degree of authority and power within the government, and they can exercise that authority, and you can approach a government minister to get something done, and that government minister can get the work done that you want. But, this is the important point, that government minister is dependent upon and not independent of the authority of the king. The king is the best example because in traditional thought, a king is often considered the supreme authority and can do whatever he, or if it's a queen, she wants. Sometimes there have been in our societies, also within our history, although we're usually male-oriented, but there have been queens who have the same authority that kings have. So the king or queen has unlimited authority within the setup of many states, or many nation states even. So the minister within that king's kingdom cannot accomplish your work for you separate from the independence, the authority of the king. The minister cannot do anything independently of the authority of the king, but can get something done for you. So in the same way, it is possible that larger consciousnesses, that is, consciousnesses whose bodies are much larger and more powerful than ourselves, they can do something for us, you might say. We can get some benefit from an association with them, or what we may call a worship of them. And of course, they're not independent of God. But because people do derive benefit from worshiping such a being as a star, they do it, and they may get their work done. And that's why people have been polytheists, because they have seen that they get some benefit from something, but they don't understand, or they didn't used to understand, that only one God is the source of every star's ability, or every larger consciousness's, larger bodied consciousness's ability to benefit us or do something for us. So this gets a little intricate when we start understanding a little more about why things have been the way they have in the history of our planet. So this is a very, very important point to understand here, that consciousness exists not only in ourselves, in individual human beings, but also in things like planets, stars, galaxies. And because of the fact that those larger or more powerful authorities, we can call them, can do things for us, there has been a tendency throughout human history to worship them. But again, I will repeat, although previously it had been taught also that there is only one God, but it was really the Prophet of Islam, Hazrat Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who made this very crystal clear, and by whose teachings actually this has become spread all around the world. This sort of understanding has become clarified thanks to his insistence on this one point, La ilaha illallah. There is really only one God. And the tendency has been to think that therefore, because there are no other independent authorities, therefore there are no other authorities in the universe, like stars, etc. But we're trying to clarify today, in understanding consciousness, that consciousness has many different degrees of manifestation and different degrees of power associated with different limited consciousnesses. And therefore, we should be aware that these other beings on a much larger scale than ourselves do exist, just as beings, conscious beings, on a much smaller scale than ourselves do exist. The little cells and many, many germs and bacteria within our bodies also are actually conscious entities. So, let's check the time here. It's been about half an hour. So maybe we'll take a break here, and I'm going to talk about consciousness more tomorrow, and for the rest of this week we're going to be focusing more on this type of understanding of the structure of existence, and we will discuss consciousness in the transdimensional existence also, as well as the consciousness that we directly experience and what is the relationship. So I'm going to go back and see what sort of questions we may have now. Oh, I see Parth Sachdev is here. Happy to have you. Namaste. I'm looking forward to having a discussion with you about India and Pakistan, not now, but we will do that separately. So, any questions? Let me see. All right. We have some question or comment about consciousness here. Akhlaq Hussein has said, consciousness, according to Western thinkers, comprises of three: instinct, intellect, intuition. But Muslims add one thing to it, that is ilham. Okay, we may distinguish between intuition and ilham. It depends on how we define intuition, I guess. But yes, as I understand it, ilham means something spiritual, a spiritual faculty to understand. So it all depends on the definition, I suppose. Sometimes intuition could be corresponding with ilham, or we can say material intuition and spiritual intuition, perhaps, if we want to distinguish between them. But this is a very, very important fact that we're discussing right now. Yes, thank you very much, Akhlaq Hussein ji, for bringing this up. That in addition to what Western thinkers generally describe, and we won't go into detail right now about what consciousness is according to Western thinkers, but the intuition of the consciousness is very, very important. It's actually the most important in terms of Western thought. They may not say it's the most important, but if we're talking about those features of consciousness, yes, intuition would be the most important. And if we want to distinguish it, ilham would be the most important. That is the direct spiritual perception. So thank you for pointing that out. All right. We have request to speak in Urdu. ये हमेशा कोई न कोई पूछता है या उर्दू बोलो, मांगता है कि मैं उर्दू बोलूं, तो 1 मिनट के लिए कुछ बोलूँगा, लेकिन जैसे मैंने बताया ये क्लास अंग्रेज़ी में होगा. हर शनिचर को हम उर्दू में क्लास लेंगे. So let's see, are there any other questions or comments? Imran Javed has said, so Quran tells us there are jinns. They are made of fire. And again, us, we are made of soil. So, yes, this is, I have no doubt that this is true. Others may not accept it. There are many types of bodies that are made of many types of substances. For example, we could say the sun would appear to be made of fire. The body of the sun is made of fire. So there are many, many types of beings whose bodies are made of many different things. So Imran Javed is going on. When ilham is on a prophet, it's wahi. When it's on non-prophets, it's khaf. Okay? He means kashaf, yes. So yes, we can accept that also. There are different types of consciousness. There are many different levels and degrees of consciousness. And when a prophet is perceiving something using ilham or using that spiritual intuition, it is wahi or revelation. And non-prophets experience that sort of ilham also, that sort of spiritual intuition. And when a non-prophet experiences that, it is called kashaf. So that's a different type of revelation, if we want to use that word, which is not totally equivalent to the prophet's intuition. Okay? What do you think about Yajub Majud? Well, I don't want to get off the topic, so I will just say that Yajud and Majud are also conscious. They must be conscious beings too, but we won't go into degree of that. So Imran Javed is going on to explain that wahi, that is revelation, prophetic revelation, is error-free by nature. Okay, we can accept that. Muhammad Faisal, do you believe life after death? Definitely. And I believe that even now, because I've experienced it, I don't think I've spoken about this particular experience I had, but many people have experienced out-of-body, where once I found myself up near the roof looking down at my body. I was awake, I was alive. It's not like when you're asleep, you travel out of your body and you can experience there that you don't need your body to be experiencing things. So when I was awake once, I had the experience of traveling out of my body and looking down at my body and looking down at the other people who are with me in the room. So when you've once experienced that, then it gives you a sense that we must exist after death also, because even within this lifetime, we can experience our existence separate from the body, so why would we need the body to continue existing after the death of the body? We don't. And of course, there's a whole science of near-death experiences and out-of-body travel, and many, many people, and there are books you can research this. I don't offhand, even Ian Stevenson is the name of one of them. I'm trying to remember, right now I'm not remembering the name of the most important, most well-known scientist who has studied near-death experiences. Maybe Raymond Moody was one of them, but there have been several scientists, often medical doctors or psychologists, who have studied the fact that we exist as consciousness separate from the body, and we don't depend on the body, therefore we continue existing after the death of the body. And many people have had near-death experiences, that is, where they've died, what we would usually call dying, and from a scientific or a neurological perspective, the brain has gone dead. Of course, the person has stopped breathing, and then the brain registers no activity at all. But after some time, the person revives, and they can remember what happened during that time when they were dead. So, certainly, it's not a belief. You ask, do you believe life after death? It's not a belief, it's actually scientific knowledge. You don't need extraterrestrial information to understand the fact that there is life after death. There is plenty of evidence right now, right here on this planet, by scientific study, that life exists apart from the body. Life exists after death also. And it's just because, as we've talked about many times, there is a cabal, there is a group of powerful people who control the media of the world, who control the educational institutions, most of the educational institutions and most of the media in the world, and they don't want us to know about these truths which have been scientifically demonstrated. So therefore we may not hear about them. We certainly don't usually get taught them in our schools. So Imran Javed is going on, in Kashf we can make mistakes. And the Quran says that when you sleep, your soul or spirit goes to the metaphysical world. Yes, that's very much in accord with what I've learned from extraterrestrial sources also, and from many different sources. I've also described that when you sleep you go out of your body, but not always to the metaphysical world. One also, although one may say that it's metaphysical, but one can also experience things within this world when one is sleeping. So that's also possible, that when the soul or spirit goes out of the body at the time of sleep, we can, definitely we do, usually I guess, go into different dimensions, different higher dimensions, maybe to lower dimensions also when we have nightmares, but we can go into higher dimensions, to metaphysical. I don't know if by metaphysical you mean transdimensional or not, because there are metaphysical realms within this existence, our universal existence, that are higher than our level of physicality. But there's also the transdimensional existence, which, as I've explained before, is different from this existence because it is eternal. And this existence is not eternal, it is created. And ultimately, although there's some difference of opinion on this point among extraterrestrials also, but it will cease to exist at some point. Some people believe that it will never stop existing, but the general consensus seems to be that it will come to an end at some point. I really don't know for sure on that. My own opinion is that that's what would happen, but I really don't know for sure. It is possible that this existence will continue eternally, according to some sources. But so the metaphysical world definitely is eternal, and this world, as far as we can know, had a start and will have an end. So I'm not sure, Imam Javed Sahib, if when you're saying that the spirit goes to the metaphysical world, if you're identifying that with the eternal transdimensional world, or if you might be discussing different realms within this existence that we experience here, the dimensional existence. So if you're talking about different dimensions within this existence as metaphysical, I would agree with you completely that the spirit usually goes to that sort of different dimensional existence within this physical reality. But it can also go to the transdimensional existence, and it can remain within this dimensional existence in other dimensions. Alright, so Imran Javed looks like is describing a little further. It travels back as you wake up, as revealed into Quran. Yes, that is also what I have learned from other sources as well, that when we wake up, our soul or our consciousness returns to the body. It really does travel outside of the body. And we have many different experiences when we're dreaming. So let me just mention here as an aside, since we do have, I'm just checking the time, we can have a few more minutes here. I do believe, and in fact I have no doubt, that when we sleep and dream, we leave the body. And of course, again, modern Western science would not accept that. They say dreams are just projections of our consciousness that somehow happen within our body, within our brain, usually they would say. But I take the position, and I think it's pretty certain that, in fact, I would say it's completely certain. I don't know of any higher extraterrestrial sources that don't accept this basic principle, that when we sleep, or at other times when we go into trances, we can leave the body, and we return to the body when we wake up, or when we come out of that trance and come back to the ordinary mode of consciousness that we have. All right. Now Abdur Razik is saying, Sir, souls move around in shape of white smoke, moving in circles, have experienced that, and the souls can react too. Consciousness exists in souls too. Well, I won't comment on the white smoke part of this, but the other part, 100% I agree, that souls can react to, consciousness exists in souls too. Yes, in fact, it may be that the soul actually is made out of consciousness and is consciousness. Again, we're going to have to get to definitions of terms, but yes, definitely consciousness exists in souls too. In fact, it may be better to talk about this reality in this way, that consciousness is identified with the soul, and the body is not actually conscious. The body appears to be conscious because the soul is present, and when the soul leaves the body, the consciousness is no longer present in the body. So you may have experienced that souls move around in the shape of white smoke, moving in circles. I won't deny that, and that could be a valid experience. I would say that there are other ways of experiencing souls also, besides as being white smoke moving in circles. Imran Javed has said, Iqbal says the science can provide just a one-dimensional view of nature. That's a very wonderful description. Allama Iqbal, of course, is a very, very deep thinker, one of the deepest thinkers of not only 20th century, but of all of human history that we know of. And he was well aware of the very, very limited nature of science. Depending again on your term, meaning what do you mean by science, but modern Western science, what we usually call science in the modern world, is very, very one-dimensional. Yes, very limited, extremely limited. In fact, they themselves acknowledge that they will only accept that truth or that knowledge that comes through our senses. And that's sort of their definition of knowledge, is what we can experience with our senses. So that's extremely limited. That's very one-dimensional, as you have pointed out here. So I think we can end now, and thank you all very much. I look forward to discussing more about consciousness tomorrow, and I hope you've gained something from this, and I look forward to further discussion. Imran Javed is saying, Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam. Yes, I've read that book. I read it many, many years ago. In fact, when I was at the University of Karachi, in, what year was it, 1968 to 69, I read that book. It's a very, very profound book. I wouldn't say it's 100% perfect, but it's very, very deep. And Saima Aziz Mirza Allama Iqbal went to Germany. Was he not influenced by secret societies? He may have been. I don't know much about that. Okay, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow, inshallah. May God protect us all.